Carolina with alwaysexpectmore.com, and today I'm back to show you the part 3 video of this 3-part series in how to make this quilt. In part 1 we talked about how to pick the patterns and how to pick the quilt design and how those went together. And then in part 2, I showed you how to cut everything out on the Cricut Maker. And today we're doing my favorite part, which is sewing the quilt together. So today I'm going to show you how to follow the instructions that are right in Design Space in order to stitch up this quilt. Are you ready? Let's get started. So as I've prepared everything here, I have my printed instructions, and you can leave these on your iPad, the PDF instructions, and scroll through them if you like. I'm a paper girl, so I like having it all printed out, but either way is absolutely fine. Or you could also follow along with this video, whatever works for you. I have all my pieces laid out and cut, labeled, and organized. So we used a different fabric and pattern combination than you would find anywhere else, which I just thought was fun because I love the log cabin look with Christmas quilts. And so we numbered all of our fabrics here on this card that came with the fabric kit. I then made labels and numbered each one of my fabrics here, because if you'll remember, the number 1 is the white, 2 is a border, the number 3 is an inner border, and then the number 11 is a binding. So those numbers get skipped in our order, and so I'm just used labels, and these are like labels from like planner labels, but you can use whatever labels or post-it notes that you have handy, just so that you keep those organized and remember which number is which without having to constantly refer back to your paper. So once we've done that, we're going to go into our instructions, and we're going to start with the sewing directions. I have my inner border, outer border, and binding, and these are just going to get set aside. We'll be using these later in the video. It tells me to lay out a 4-inch square of fabric 1 with a 1 3/4 inch by 4-inch strip of fabric 8. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my square of fabric 1, and this is going to be the smallest piece of fabric 8, and we're going to stitch those together. I have my 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine, and I've put in a neutral thread. For me, a neutral thread is often either a taupe or a gray. You can use whatever neutral that you prefer. This quilt has both white and black, so I prefer not to use a white or a black because the black's going to show up on the white fabric and the white's going to show up on the black fabric. So something in between. I like a nice soft gray. So I've lined up the edges of the 2 fabrics right sides together. This white actually doesn't have a right side or a wrong side, so either way is fine. And I've just lined up those 2 edges. I don't use pins when I'm quilting, but you can if you like. And I'm just stitching a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. I need to fix so that my needle ends up in the up position at the end. If you have a machine that's not mechanical, you just want to end so that here you have your take-up lever all the way up, and that's going to prevent your thread from pulling each time. So we're going to do presser foot up, clip this thread, and now we can just press this towards the out. So this is how we'll do that. Just press it towards out. Perfect. So that was step 1. Now we're going to grab the next larger piece of fabric 8, and that will go right here, right sides together. Same thing, we'll just line it up here at the edge. Make sure my needle is up. Presser foot up. And then just press it towards the out. Now we're going to make sure that we line it up the right way. That's with this white square. Let's see, there we go. just like in our picture, with our white square here, our shorter piece here, and our longer piece on the bottom. And then we're going to add a 5 and 3/4 inch strip to this side here. And you'll know that you have the right size strip when it just fits perfectly. Just in case you're wondering, because there are some different sizes of strips. Just line it up with the edge of your 1/4 inch foot and sew. Your needle will be in the up position, your take up lever will be up. Press your foot up. And press towards the out. Now generally we like to press towards the dark. That's often what we say in quilting. We also like to press out because as our block is growing, we like to press out. And in this case, those two are in odds with each other because we're pressing, I just have a little schmutz there. There we go. We're pressing towards the out, but obviously this white is darker than this, and that's okay. If you like, you can press in, but I find, especially for beginners, when you keep pressing out, you're going to keep the shape of your block better. Now we just have one more piece of, oh, it's actually our white that we need to add. So let me grab that one. This is our fabric 1. Yep, and I have the right size. It fits exactly. So right sides together. Bring that over. And there we go. We have our first block done. So if I go back to my instructions, it tells me that I need to make 6 of the exact same block that I just made, following steps 1 through 8, and then follow these same steps, making 6 using fabrics 10 and 4, 6 more using fabrics 4 and 9, and 6 more using fabrics 6 and 5. And that's going to take a while if I use the steps that I just did to make this one. So instead, I'm going to show you how to do exactly what we just did, but chain piece it so that it goes a lot quicker. So we need to make 5 more of this one. So I'm going to grab 5 more of these squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which sure enough is all of them. And then I need 5 of these outer and these inner. So that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 of this piece. And then 5 of the outer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And I'll have some left for a different block. And then the same with fabric 8. And then I'll have some pieces left over for one of the other blocks. So now I can go ahead and get started on chain piecing these. So now I have 5 more of each block, and I have the original block that I made underneath, but you don't need to do it that way. And now I can chain piece these all together. So that means grabbing the first 2 pieces, putting them right sides together, press your foot down and sewing. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. Same 2 pieces. I'm just going to make sure there's a couple stitches between this set and the last set. And you can see I'm just making a little chain of all of the exact same pieces. So now I've done a chain of the first one. I can actually leave that one there if I want to not break the chain. and just grab these. I'm going to move my extra pieces out of the way for a second. And then I can press all of these at the same time. And you can see how much faster that is. Instead of starting and stopping and starting and stopping, you just chain right through them. Now I'm going to put them all back, and I like to put things back exactly where I had them. So you can see everything's in the same spots in the same order. That way I know I'm not accidentally going to make one upside down. So I'm going to grab it, make sure it's the right way. Line everything up and go in and stitch it. Gonna grab my scissors, clip that one off. Now these are all exactly the same fabric, so it doesn't matter if they get out of order in any way because there's no order. They're all exactly the same. I'm going to do the exact same steps to chain on this row. Continuing to chain all these pieces on, then press, then chain this piece on, press, chain this piece on, press, and I'll have all my blocks done. So let's go ahead and fast forward right through all that. So there we go. I have all the blocks for unit Y1 done, and I'm going to repeat this process for units Y10, Y4, and Y6. And here's how we'll do that. So these will be all my units Y10, and I'm going to do the same for units Y4 and Y6. Now unit Z is put together the exact same way. They've just labeled them unit Z's. I think it's because it's our lights or our darks possibly. Not entirely sure, but that's okay. So we're going to do the exact same thing for laying out units Z7, Z5, Z8, Z9, and we're just going to strip piece all of these sets to make all of our quilt blocks. When we come back, we'll have all of our quilt blocks made, and I'll show you how to put those quilt blocks together, and then it's just time to add our borders and have our quilt top complete. So I've stitched up all my blocks and I've laid them out, and you can either use the block A, block B information that is on the very first page of the general information instruction sheet, or you can go on to step 19 and see how block A is laid out. So the important thing is to make sure that everything is turned the correct way, which I actually missed with this one. There we go. And this one as well. Here we go. And so the blocks have this backwards C and forward C design, and that's how you can make sure that you have them facing the same direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew the top two pieces together and then press, and sew the bottom two pieces together and then press the seam allowance in the other direction, and then we'll be sewing these two together across here to make our full block. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. Let's get the instructions out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and heat up my iron already so that it's ready for me to go when I'm ready to press. Let's grab these two and we can put them right sides together. We could take the labels off already. I'm going to just leave them on for a minute. And you don't label every single block in your whole stack, just label the top one in your stack. Now we like chain piecing as much as possible, so if you have all of your blocks here, you can go ahead and pair all these sets and then stitch all 6 of them. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one and stitch this one, so you could actually stitch the whole top 6 and then the whole bottom 6 before pressing all of them. Just going to make sure these edges line up. Give myself a couple stitches here between, and then keep stitching all the way through. Cut my threads. I'm just going to lay it out and make sure that I still have that same design, the backward C and the forward C, and that way I know I have everything lined up and correct. And then I need to go ahead and press my blocks, and I'm going to press this one towards the mittens and then this one away from the mittens. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got my iron heated up, and here actually I do want to take these stickers off because the heat from the iron can actually mess with the adhesive in the stickers and could actually cause it to really like fuse to your fabric, which would be very sad. So I'm going to flip this one over, and I said I'm pressing this one towards the mittens. And this one I'm pressing away from the mittens. Now the reason that we're doing that is we're pressing the seams in opposite directions. The top one has been pressed over to the right, and this bottom one is being pressed over to the left. And the reason that that's important is because, let me get my iron out of the way so I don't burn myself, is because when I put these two together, I'll be able to do what's called nesting the seams, which is where these seams come together right here. I'll be able to feel the little lump of the seams on that side and the little lump of the seams on that side, and I'll just be able to feel this with my fingers and get those points lined up pretty much perfectly every time. And then based on that, I'm going to then line up the other edges of my fabric and stitch this longer seam right here. There's my block. All I have to do is press this seam right here, and you can really choose what direction to press it in. You can either press it up or press it down. I'm going to show you how to spin the seams, which is just a way to get less bulk right here in the middle, because if you press it like this, you're going to have a lot of bulk right here. If you press it right there, you're going to have a lot of bulk right there. We can reduce all of that bulk by spinning the seams. You have this seam going this direction and this seam going this direction, and so we're just going to keep all of them then going counterclockwise. So this one's going in this direction. I'm going to spin this one over there, and I'm going to press all of it except the very middle. I'm trying not to hit my iron on that very middle. That middle, I'm just going to kind of pop it open a little bit. And I can press that flat. And then press again from the other side to smooth everything out. And when you have your seams perfectly lined up in the middle when you've nested those seams. It makes it very easy to spin the seams as I've done here. And I'll show you what that looks like. You can see it's just kind of spun all around in the middle there. And that just reduces the bulk across all the seams. So there we go. That's how you make your A block, and you just repeat that same process to make 5 more blocks. You can chain piece them all at the same time if you like. I've gone ahead and made these already, so now I have my 6 A blocks, and now I need to make my B blocks. The B blocks are made the exact same way. We're going to go back to our instructions, and you can just look on the front if you like. So I have block 4, block 9, block 6, and block 8. Now you'll also notice that with all of these, you'll see that your color here goes through here, and same on this side. That happened on these blocks as well. The white is in the middle here and on the outsides here, and the outsides here doesn't match the inside here, but the outsides here match the inside there. So it's not an exact swap. It's this one and this one don't match, but the rest of them do. So it's 3 fabrics, 1 fabric, 2 fabric, 3 fabrics that make up a half. So I've got 1, 2, 3 fabrics that make up this half, and 1, 2, 3 fabrics that make up this half. I'm going to remove my stickers. Did you catch my mistake? Because I caught it here. This is my backwards C. There we go. This one's my forward facing C. So now I'm just going to stitch these 2 top ones together, these 2 bottom ones together, press them, and then stitch my big seam, and then this block will be done. So let's go ahead and do that. So there we go. I have all of my B blocks done, just like that. And now it's time to put the quilt top together. The first step in putting the quilt top together is putting the blocks together, and then the second step is adding on our borders. To put the blocks together, we're going to go ahead and refer back to our instructions. So we start with rows 1 and 3, and then we're going to do rows 2 and 4, and they are done the same way, just backwards. So this is 2 A blocks with a B in between, where we just sew them together. And this one's 2 B blocks with an A in between, where we sew them together. So that's easy enough. We want to make sure that we have them right sides up. The easiest way to tell if we have them right side up is this is fabric 1, our white. And so this down here will be fabric 4, whatever you have inside here, which is my black with the pine boughs if you're doing the same thing as I am. This would be fabric 4, the black with the pine boughs. So that way I know I have them both right side up. We're going to stitch a block A, B, and then A together. I love chain piecing, as you can tell. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch together 4 sets of block A and block B with A on the left and B on the right. And then to make our rows 1 and 3, we'll just stitch an A to the right of those. And to make our blocks 2 or rows 2 and 4, we'll stitch a B to the left. And that way we'll just make all of ours right at once, but then I can chain piece 4 of these guys together just right in a row. So go ahead and lay them right sides together. And we'll just quick stitch up 4 of these. Once you've stitched up 4, you'll have 2 of each remaining, and that's perfect. And we'll just clip these apart. I'm leaving one on my sewing machine because it's nice to have what we call a leader or an ender, something still under the machine. It helps the thread from getting sucked back underneath. So I've got this one. I'm going to make this one a row 1, which means grabbing one of these ones from the top and adding it to the right. So I'm going to take my first 2 rows and add a block to the right. Now, if these instructions are confusing, you can go ahead and follow the printed instructions where it just tells you to make 2 of one kind of row and 2 of another kind of row. I just like speeding things up if I can. So there's one, and now I can clip off that extra pair that I didn't clip off at the beginning there. And remember, all of these sets are exactly the same. Right now I have 4 sets, and I've added a block to make my row 1, and now I add a block to make my row 3. Or this could be my row 1 and the other one could be my row 3. It's the same thing. And now to the other 2 sets, I'm going to add this block to the left-hand side, which just means adding it over here, flipping it over, right sides together. And I'm not going to put it through the machine this way. I'm actually going to turn it 180 degrees and put it through this way. You always want the bulk of your fabric over on the left-hand side. You don't want to try to smush it into the throat if you can help it. Okay, last row. Gonna open this up. I know this is my fabric 1. All right, so I have my 4 rows together. These are my even rows, and these are my odd rows. And they're all going to need to get stitched together to make the final quilt top. Now, if you have a nice big floor or table where you can lay these out to look at them, that's awesome and perfect. I'm actually not going to do that here. I don't have the big floor area unless I run off into another room. So it tells us with rows 1 and 3 that we're going to press the seams to the right. And that's because with these even rows, we're pressing the seams to the right. With the odd rows, we're pressing the seams to the left. So let's go ahead and do that. The right is this direction. So let's press these. And we'll do this with both of them. And you're just pressing the seams that you just pressed. You're not going to go find other seams and press everything to the right or to the left. These are my even rows, and I'm going to do the same thing, just press the seams in the other direction. So while it's most comfortable for me to press towards me, I am pressing them to the left because I haven't rotated the row 180 degrees this time. There we go. Our rows are all pressed and ready to go. This is my row 2, or it could be my row 4. I need to grab a row 1 or 3, which would be this one here. Make sure that I have it with this white and red up at the top. Line things up. It's starting to look like a quilt in here. So I'm going to stitch these 2 rows together and then the other 2 rows exactly the same. And then I can just do one big seam and stitch that together. So I'm just 3 seams away from having all my blocks put together. Then we just need to add on some borders. So let's get started. There we go. Both rows are done, and now it's just time to put together the 2 row pairs. Top one, bottom one. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and lay this out on a big table or on a floor to make sure that everything's lined up. I'm confident that I've lined everything up okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and stitch this last seam to get all these blocks together. There we go. All of the blocks are all put together and I have the middle of my quilt. I'm going to take this to my big ironing board and press all of the seams that I just did all in the same direction. It really doesn't matter which direction. Then I'm going to measure each side of the quilt and then the middle of the quilt from top to bottom, and I'm going to explain that why when we get to the borders. If you'll remember, we cut these in the last video using the rotary cutter, ruler, and mat. So you can go back and refer to that if you need cutting instructions still for how to cut your borders. So we have these borders all cut and I've actually already pieced them together. And the way I pieced them is that I just took each of the strips and I put them right sides together with the selvages still on. And then I stitched a 5/8 inch seam allowance on the edge. And the reason 5/8 inch was because after I had them all stitched together, then I trimmed it down to 1/4 inch, and that takes that selvage off. You don't want this selvage either in your seam allowance or in your quilt top showing anywhere, unless you're specifically making a selvage quilt, which is a whole nother thing. But generally speaking, we don't want the selvage anywhere in our quilt when it's finished, not even hidden in the seam allowances. So you go ahead and trim that off. And then you press your seams open. And the reason I press my seams open on my quilt borders is because I'm never going to need to stitch in the ditch there. I want those to lay as flat as possible, to be as hidden as possible. So for borders, I like to press open, but you can absolutely press to the side if you prefer. After pressing my quilt top, I measured, and I told you I was measuring both long sides as well as down the middle. And what you do is you take those 3 measurements and you add them all together, and then you divide them by 3. And what that does is it gives you an average of the height of your quilt, and we're going to use that number to cut the length for our side borders. Now, when I did mine, my average was 48.5 inches, which is perfect. So I cut my side border strips to 48.5 inches. You'll see some patterns will actually tell you what size to cut those borders based on the math of what size your quilt top should be if you'd pieced it perfectly. But most people, we don't actually quilt our pieces perfectly. We'd love to, it just doesn't actually happen that way. So if you have a quilt pattern that tells you to cut it exactly to a size, you could follow those instructions, but I would still recommend doing it this way. This pattern actually tells you to just stitch those borders on and then trim off the excess, which you could also do. But the challenge with stitching those borders on and trimming off the excess is that your sewing machine has feed dogs on the bottom that are pulling the bottom fabric and a presser foot on the top that is just sitting on top of the fabric. And some newer machines do have an extra feed dog on the top, or some people like to piece with their walking foot, so they have feed dogs on the top, so the top and bottom fabric are pulled more evenly. But there's still the potential for those fabrics to shift a little bit, and if one is getting pulled through at a faster rate than the other, then you'll actually have a ruffle. So if you've ever made a quilt top and added on the borders and you have these like wavy quilt borders on the edges, that's exactly what happened. Is because you added your quilt border, stitched it all together, and then cut off the excess, and your quilt border ended up actually being a little longer than your quilt top, and it all kind of got ruffled in there as you were sewing. So to prevent ruffly borders, this is what we do. We measure the sides, we measure the middle, we add those 3 numbers together, and we divide by 3. For me, that was 48.5 inches. Then we cut both of our side borders to 48.5 inches. You with me so far? Now, this is the one time that you're actually going to see me pin. I know, I actually do pin with quilting, but it is very rare, and it is really only with borders. I'm going to make sure I have my side. Yep, that's half. There's 4 across. And I'm going to pin my border right sides together right here on the corner. I'm going to grab my little pin cushion and pin here at this corner. I'm going to take it all the way across. I want to make sure that I don't have any twists in the border. And then I'm going to pin on this end as well. And now you could have measured both pieces and found the exact middle to pin the middle. I just fold it in half match up my corners. And this is so that if this side was like the short side, when you measured the 3 and then added them all together, that one side was a little bit shorter or one side was a little bit longer, that you're just getting any extra in that border to be even all the way across. So I just folded it in half, found the middle for both, and I'm pinning here. And if you have a big table, you could lay the whole thing flat as well, and that way you could find the middle and pin along. So now I'm going to just lay it flat, this half, and I'm going to add some more pins. And really all I'm doing is making sure that my border is flat with the edge of my quilt. And so any extra border, if it's just a little bit longer, or any extra quilt, if the border is a little bit shorter, gets distributed evenly across the length of the whole quilt. Because really you might have like a 1/4 inch, maybe on a bigger quilt, a 1/2 inch difference in the measurements of each side. And so you just want that 1/2 inch or inch of extra fabric to get absorbed across the whole length of the quilt, because over the course of a couple feet, an inch of fabric can just get absorbed in. Now, if your 2 sides were different, is that because you're a terrible quilter? No, absolutely not. Of course you're not a terrible quilter. If your 2 sides are a little bit different, it just means that you had some extra wild fabric. Fabric is cotton. Cotton grows wild. It's a natural thing, and it wants to revert back to its natural state. So if you might have just had a little bit extra wild cotton in your fabric, and it just needed a little extra taming, and that's okay. All right, so I have quite a few pins, at least I think quite a few pins. My pins are probably about a hand's width apart all the way down my whole length of my quilt. And so now I'm just going to sew on this border the exact same way. You take all of your fabric and put it to the left of your needle, and you line everything up, press your foot down, and you start sewing. Now, when you have a bigger quilt top like this, one of the challenges is that your quilt gets really heavy and it starts pulling forward. So what you do to prevent that is you start bringing fabric up here. You start bringing fabric up, because you don't want your feed dogs to have to pull the whole quilt through. Just bring this a little bit forward. And when you find that you don't have a lot built up back here anymore, you just bring a little more up and keep bringing the rest of the quilt up along, so that those feed dogs aren't having to do the work of all the quilt. You don't want to be pushing the fabric underneath the feet, but you want to give the feed dogs the fabric there so it can easily grab it. When you sew, make sure that you are pulling your pins before they end up under your needle. If a pin ends up under your needle and the needle smacks it dead center, which does happen and has happened to me before, that needle can actually bend. It can bend right into your bobbin housing. It can mess up your needle, it can mess up your bobbin housing, and it can be a really expensive repair, all for a pin that costs less than a penny. So before that pin gets under your needle, go ahead and pull it out of the way. So there we go. I'm just going to keep sewing this border on, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew the other side border on, and then we'll do the top and bottom inner borders. Have both my side borders for my inner border on, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press, and I'm going to press the seam allowance towards the border. Then I'm going to do the exact same steps that I did to add the side borders, to add the top and bottom borders, which is measure the top, the middle, the bottom, add those numbers together, divide by 3, and use that measurement to cut my top and bottom borders, pin those on the same way, stitch those on. And then I'm going to go through the same process with my outer borders. Measure sides, middle, divide by 3, use that to cut my side borders, pin, stitch those on, And same exact thing for the top and bottom outer borders. And that's why we go round and round to add the borders onto the quilt. I'm going to get that working right here, and I'll be back once I have all those borders on. So there we go. I have all the borders on my quilt. My quilt is all pieced, and I've got a fully finished quilt top. And really, you can do this whole quilt top from start to finish in a weekend. The next step is going to be quilting it. And if you'd like, I have a couple of videos on quilting, both one on free motion quilting and one on walking foot quilting as part of my Cricut Maker block of the week. And you can follow along on those on some basic ideas for quilting. Or if you like, I could make a bonus video where I show you how I quilt this, because this will be a little bit different than my Cricut Maker block of the week quilt. That one was a lot smaller. This one is a little bit bigger, and so there's a little bit more to get underneath the throat. But go ahead and follow along on those videos on how to base the quilt. I went ahead and bought some backing fabric. I bought 3 yards, which is more than enough backing fabric, and I just picked a fun Christmassy check that I thought would go well with the quilt here. Or you could go online and look for matching Riley Blake fabric if you wanted to go exactly with your quilt top, if that's what you choose. And then I still have my binding fabric. The binding fabric is going to get cut into, for me, I like a 2-inch. Some people like a 2.5-inch strip for their binding. That's a personal preference, up to you. I like a really, really skinny binding, so I cut mine into 2.5-inch strips. Those can either get cut on the diagonal, which is called on the bias, or you can straight cut them. Both are perfectly acceptable, and then you can put those on, and I have a binding video as part of the Cricut Maker block of the week where you can see how to bind your quilt top. And it's that easy to whip up a Christmas quilt in plenty of time for Christmas with the Cricut Maker and Riley Blake fabric kits. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, as well as the videos before. If you have any questions or comments, leave those comments down below. I do look for those comments and I do answer them. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, make sure that you're subscribed. I have lots and lots of fun in store with Cricut and with fabric, and I'm so excited to show you what I've got going on. Make sure you hit subscribe and then hit that bell, because that bell will notify you when I have a new video up, and you'll be one of the first to get to see it. Thanks again for joining me on this journey to make this quilt. I look forward to seeing y'all online soon. Bye-bye.